Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. For a growing number of Americans, World War II is only a thing of history books. But for our guests today, World War II helped shape who they are today. To my far left is Lindy Palin. He was a B-17 pilot. And to his right is Joe Queenan, the unofficial mayor of Derby Line. He was a Marine who saw action on the island of Okinawa. And to my immediate left is Ed Peranto of Derby, who served as a sailor during the Omaha Beach invasion on D-Day. Welcome to the show. And I want to start off just by thanking you for your service. I can't even imagine what life was like for you guys because when you were younger, did you travel out beyond your borders very often, or did your life revolve around your home?
Well, mine pretty much did for the first couple of years after I got out of high school. But then I migrated way down south to Hartford, Connecticut, to work in a defense plant.
But when you were growing up, did you have a real world view of what was out there?
Probably not.
Right.
I was always somewhat fascinated by history,
right.
but I probably didn't have a real understanding of everything that was going on.
It was interesting that your name, Lindy, well, you also have a obsession with Lindbergh.
Yeah, I was 7. I think I was 7 years old when he crossed the Atlantic solo. That made a big impression on me, and I got very involved in building model airplanes, and I was always very interested in flight. And when I was probably in my mid-teens, there was a little airport in Derby, and my dad paid for us to go up for a ride in one of the old high-wing monoplanes. I think it was a Stinson. So that was my first real experience of flight. And when I was in high school, we all went to Burlington for the music festival. And I saved my money, and I went out to the airport, and I got a guy to take me for a stunt ride. In today's environment, he'd probably put in jail for taking a 17-year-old kid up for a stunt ride without parental permission or anything else.
So you were, that was what you knew you were going to do someday.
It's what I wanted to do.
Right.
I didn't know that I would ever have an opportunity to do it.
Right. And what about you, Joe? What was life like for you before the war?
Well, of course, I came up from Massachusetts, and I went into Derby in February of '41, and I finished my junior year there at Derby Academy. And then I transferred to Newport because I liked football, and Derby didn't have it. But that was a good move because the people down around here, they took me right in as if I'd been with them since the first grade. They were great. And everything was going beautiful. I hitchhiked from Derby that whole year to go to school, and I had ways to get rides, but it, you're going along and everything's happy, you're playing your sports, and like Lindy said, he had something in mind. I had nothing as far as what I wanted to do down the line, but I did like my sports, and like everybody was happy, and I had a job at the old J.C. Penney store on Main Street. Bucky Buchanan and his wife ran it, and I'd work Friday nights, and if we were on the road football-wise on Saturday, I wouldn't, but if we were home, I'd work Saturday mornings, and had no worries, everything was fine. I mean, all of a sudden, this December 7th happened, and I remember where I was standing out in front of anybody that's out there knows where the old Royal Cafe was, and it was a cloudy, dreary morning, and where is water? I mean, Pearl Harbor. And I'm thinking, something had no idea. Just everything was casual. I had a good life. I was happy, and so then I went on and I graduated from Newport High that year. That May they let us out early, but in the meantime, there was a man named Arthur Mooney from Newport, and they formed what they call a Vermont State Guard. And I remember there was like Bill Britch and Arthur Mooney was the captain, and Dad Park. A lot of people would know them. They know Bill Britch and Red Morgan and Louis Dean, and we used to drill in the armory. And then all of a sudden, they told us we're going to Windsor, to the Cone Automatic. And they let us out of school. It was 3 of us. Bob Daly, Rudy Daly's brother, was one of them. And so anyway, we went down there and we spent 2 weeks. Part of the crew was on the plant. Some of us were out on the bridge on the river leading into the area. We used to sleep in the Windsor Armory, ate in the Windsor Diner, and everything was fine. And but then came back, and of course I was looking for it before I came down. I had discharge papers from the State Guard. So then I went down to Massachusetts, and I get down there for a while. I see some friends, and next thing you know, I went into the Fargo building in Boston, joined the Marine Corps, and that was it from there.
Okay. Now, what about you, Ed? What was life like for you before the war? Because you're about as young as you could truly be to be a World War II veteran. The people who came after you, a lot of them are occupation forces, but you kind of told a little fib, didn't you?
A little bit.
And how old were you when you enlisted?
Well, when I left for the Navy, I lived at that time in Montgomery Center.
Right.
And I left there during World War II. And after being in the Navy and in training and whatnot, I ended up in the amphibious Navy.
Right. And you were 17 years old, but you were younger when you enlisted, though, weren't you?
I don't talk a lot about that.
I don't think anybody's going to come to arrest
But
you
I
now.
but all I can tell you is this, that and I ended up in Pier 92 in New York, a bunch of us. And we were about 2 weeks, and the next thing I know, we were aboard this big ship. I don't know what kind of ship it was, but after I got aboard, I found out I was on the Queen Mary.
Oh,
We were replacements.
yeah, the Queen Mary was turned into a troop transport.
Right. And we ended up in England, of course, and they found out an airplane, the aircraft,
Right.
LST, I got in the LST's landing ship.
Right. Now, do you know where you were when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. I remember that before I went into service.
Now, where were you at the time?
Montgomery Center.
Right. And did you know when Pearl Harbor was bombed that something big was going to happen?
Yes. Yes, and a lot of younger people, such as myself, are ready to go.
Right.
During that period of time.
I think you once told me that some of the younger people were put right out front because you didn't know better to be afraid.
That's true too. I didn't know where I was going to end up, but I didn't know where I did end up.
Right.
And ended up in Normandy and
Right.
ended up on Omaha.
Okay. All right. I guess I didn't ask you, Lindy, but where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
I was living in Hartford, Connecticut, and actually, I mentioned earlier I was always fascinated with the airplane. I happened to be sitting in the parking lot at the Hartford airport
Right.
when I heard about Pearl Harbor.
And what was your reaction?
Where is that?
Probably didn't really know, like Joe said, probably didn't really know where Pearl Harbor was,
Right.
but knew that it was our country that was being attacked. And I probably thought about enlisting at that time. I had been working in a munitions type, not really munitions, but war material type factory. We had been manufacturing a lot of stuff for England. So I was very much aware of the war.
Right.
And once we were attacked, then started thinking seriously about doing what most of us did.
Now, we hear about those like you, the three of you, who enlisted because it was the right thing to do. Were there many people back in those days that you tried to dodge the draft? Did people? Because almost anybody your age, for men, seemed to have served in World War II, but there had to have been some people who tried to dodge it.
There may have been, but I don't recall anybody.
I don't.
The only people that I remember were the people who were terribly disappointed because they got turned down for physical reasons.
That's true. Because everybody had to register,
Right.
even what? Because I think we all have register cards in our
Yeah,
pocket.
everybody had to register.
And then you enlisted, of course. If you hadn't, you probably would have been drafted in. But everybody was there. Didn't seem to be any running away from it. They knew that something serious had happened, and that was what it was all about.
Now, leading up to Pearl Harbor, did you guys were aware that there was a war going on, especially in Europe?
In Europe. Yeah.
Did it ever cross your mind that we really would be joining the fight?
Not mine.
I don't.
No, I say life was a bowl of roses, I guess you call it. As far as I was concerned, I mean, it was happy-go-lucky, and everything was going fine, and had 3 squares a day, and that was it. But then when that hit, then you started reading, and you got interest more of where it is and what happened, and that was then it got serious. So.
Did you ever think you'd be, when you were growing up, Ed, did it ever cross your mind that you were going to be such a big part of history?
Not during that period of time, no. Even when I was in Europe, I didn't know.
Right.
We were not told a lot during that period of time, in a way.
Right.
I have other stories that has happened during that period of time, even before. And it's kind of a miracle that we didn't get hit before we even on the LST.
Right.
Where what they used to call the Z,
Right.
like our PTs, got amongst a bunch of LSTs, and they had 700 Army and Navy in the water.
Right.
Seals.
Yes, and this, you don't hear a lot about that, but that really did happen. And when we were heading for this, doing the same thing, and then you could see the flame, you know, what has happened. And there was, I had one thing I must talk about, talking about young people.
Right.
There's a little young coxswain in the LCVP Leningrad picking up many of those soldiers
Right.
in the Navy in the water,
Right.
picking them up. Found out later he was only 16
Right. So,
then, and he was a coxswain. I ended up a coxswain too, but
Right.
that's what he was.
Yeah.
And he finally found out how old he was after that. I guess they shipped him back to the
Well,
States.
why do you think the whole country seemed galvanized around this war and overthrowing Hitler?
Well, I would back up just a bit, Scott. One of the reasons I think that probably none of us really thought that we would be involved, you would have to go back and remember that there was a very, very strong feeling in this country for a long time, stay out
Right.
of the war. And
Actually, Lindbergh was one of those people, too.
Yes, he was. Kind of made me feel a little bit disenchanted when I found that out. But it's true. I think that there were always two sides to an issue, and there were a lot of people who felt, well, we really got to get over there and help Germany and France. But there were also a lot of people who said that's a foreign entanglement. Let's not get involved. But when Pearl Harbor happened, when we were attacked, that changed the whole atmosphere.
Now tell me, there's been in every attack on the, like the World Trade Centers, Pearl Harbor, there's always conspiracy theorists that come out soon after the bombing, and the same was true with Pearl Harbor, that some people believe that the United States and President Roosevelt actually allowed it to happen. Do you believe that conspiracy theory?
I personally don't, but I know it was very much alive.
Right. What about you, Joe? Because you just recently gave me a article that appeared in the New York Times that kind of had a similar bend.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you think your country would have allowed it to happen?
You mean?
Allowed the bombing to happen of Pearl Harbor so we could get into the fight?
I don't believe that. I know there could have been maybe in the background, as Lindy was saying, there's an area there where they were trying to get together, and yet maybe they didn't make a strong effort to get this thing straightened out before it happened. And we don't know now when the Japanese embassies people were in our country and this thing happened, and they supposedly didn't know it was going to happen. I don't know. I can't really say truthfully except that I would like to say that we didn't step ahead to do something and put our people in danger.
Right.
And it's just like that article said, and I mean it was quite an article, and it opened my eyes to something I never had given it a thought. And you can tell the people what it was, but it really was something.
Ed, being a Navy man, have you ever been to Pearl Harbor? Because there must be a real connection to the Navy people and Pearl Harbor.
I knew all about that.
But did you ever visit there in the following years?
I didn't. I was, after Europe, of course, I ended up in the Asiatic Pacific, but we went right by Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And we were there to hit Japan.
Right.
That's what that was our job.
Yeah. Then the bomb was dropped.
The bomb dropped, and we still made occupational landings.
Okay,
in Japan.
Lindy, you were a B-17 pilot, which you've told me in great detail what it was like. I find the whole thing just simply amazing that you were this farm boy. Then a few years later, you're flying over Europe fully loaded with thousands of other airplanes being shot at. Now, tell us a little bit about the airplane you first have in front of you.
Well, of course, it was built by Boeing.
Right.
And some of the statistics are a little bit hazy in my mind now, but I think the wingspan was about 103 feet.
Right.
And I think we carried about 6,000 pounds of bombs. And they could either be 500 pounders or 1,000 pounders, depending on what the target was. I don't recall what our total weight was when we took off, but I know that every takeoff was an experience because you were always praying you'd make it off the runway.
And just taking off was one thing, but then you were telling me how long it took for all you guys to get information because you had to, circle over England and get everybody. How many people were in a bomb group?
There were 3 squadrons, and each squadron would put up 12 ships, so there'd be 36 ships per group. But when you add up all the groups, this was an extreme mission, but the biggest mission I was ever on, there were 1,000 heavy bombers in the air, and 1,000 fighters. And if you can imagine, England is not that big.
Right.
To have that many aircraft circling around, and quite often in heavy clouds up until we got up to 25,000 feet, because we would be circling over England maybe 2 hours before we ever left the coast to go toward the continent, because we had to get in what they called the combat line. And then there would be one group right after another at designated distances and times. Actually, it was times. So it was really a major operation.
Now, how many men were on your aircraft?
10 men crew.
Right.
Pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, gunner, waist gunners, and tail gunner, ball turret gunner.
Right.
And he was the guy that I envied the least.
And why is that?
Ball turret gunner had to fly, once we entered the combat zone, in what I would refer to as a fetal position for the whole mission that we were over enemy territory. So he was, sort of on his back, with his legs up in the air, the gun sight in front of him, and he couldn't get out of there without help from radio operator or whoever. So it was a pretty scary place to be.
And how long was a typical mission for you?
Typical would probably be 4 to 5 hours. Longest on mine was 8 hours and minutes. We flew all the way to Czechoslovakia that day.
And I think you said on every mission you were shot at. So how did, the first time, well, first of all, how did it feel the first time? Because when you went on, you were with a seasoned crew. So how did your first flight feel?
Probably the first one was by far the scariest, because I was sitting in the co-pilot seat and just watching everything. After that, when I was flying the aircraft myself, you're so busy keeping your spot in the formation that you don't see anywhere near as much of what's going around you as the other crew members do. Because it really required total concentration to fly in close formation.
Once you're under fire, you were saying that there might be an airplane being shot down to your front right, then maybe one to your left, and you just had to maintain while trying not to get hit.
You could just keep going.
And knowing that those people were going down, that your fellow airmen were going down, did you have enough time to think about that, or did you just say, well, that's not me? You
think about it more after you get back.
Right.
Not while it's happening, but when you get back, and especially when you see the empty cots in the barracks.
So what were your targets typically?
Pretty much aircraft factories, munitions factories, oil refineries, in some cases big marshalling yards where a lot of rail traffic could be disrupted. Those were our primary concerns. Tank factories.
The one thing I found interesting when I interviewed you years ago for the first time was about the use of, what was it, chaff?
They called it chaff. Basically, it was little shreds of aluminum foil, and the waist gunners would throw that out the side of the aircraft because it distorted the images that the gunners on the ground were getting. Disrupted their radar.
I guess what surprised me about it was I figured there must have been something automated, but you actually had a guy just throwing the stuff out.
That's right. It wasn't automated.
Yeah, that's and tell the listener, the viewers, about one of your flights where you basically had to throw out anything that weren't bolted down.
Well, that was a time that we lost 2 engines, when we finally got down, we discovered that there were only 2 holes in the aircraft, and we'd been on many missions where we had more holes than that. But one was in the prop dome of one engine that caused the prop to do what we call runaway. You couldn't control it, so we had to shut it down. And the other was through the oil cooler of the other engine. And with the loss of those 2 engines, we also lost our instruments. And of course, we had to drop back from the formation because we couldn't keep up. And that was one of the scariest things, because you knew that if you were out of the formation, you were all by yourself. If any German fighters could spot you, they'd be on you, you know, in a moment. Fortunately, we didn't get seen, and we started to lighten the aircraft as much as we could, because we were having to run the remaining 2 engines at full power, and you can only do that so long. And fortunately, by the time that had happened, a lot of Belgium had been liberated. And we were able to get to a city called Liège, and there was an airfield there which had at one time been a German fighter base, but it had been taken over by the Allied forces. And we were able to make an emergency landing there. And that was the other kind of scary part of the deal, because we knew that if we didn't get it right the first time, there wasn't any second time, because you can't climb with 2 engines.
Now, you and I have become acquainted with another B-17 pilot who wasn't quite so lucky, Major Francis Angier, who used to live in Newport. He now lives in Williston.
Right.
The end of his mission ended in a POW camp.
Right.
And he suffered what I guess all the airmen are told, and probably it's even true of the ground troops, is you don't want to be captured by the villagers or the residents, because they're really mad.
Right.
But Francis was saying that when they crashed and he was severely injured, the residents of a nearby community welcomed him by a severe beating, and he said his life was actually saved by the German Wehrmacht, because they were going to kill him. And he said that they actually took pretty good care of him, medical care of him, in the POW camp. Now, did you get that information as well, as if you crash and you're going to be captured, you really do want to be captured by the military versus the civilian population?
Oh yes. Yeah. If you were going to go down in enemy territory, yeah, we were all aware of the fact that you'd prefer to be captured by troops if you were captured, not by civilians.
Right. I know Francis was telling me one person, they tried to get him not to wear his ring, and that ring ended up costing him his life, because it was the Star of David. The airman was Jewish.
Yeah.
And the Germans took extra. I believe it was the German military was extra harsh on him, and he never returned. So let's go over to you, Joe. I know before, everybody knows, anybody who knows anything about World War II history, we know about Okinawa. But you were in another battle that, until I met you, I'd never even heard of. The Battle of Bougainville. Where is Bougainville?
Well, Bougainville is out in the Pacific. It's probably right here near the
hold up.
Near New Georgia. That's just my 6th Marine Division. Look, but you can see New Georgia's down in here, and Bougainville is right in that area.
Right.
So, unbeknownst to me, where's Bougainville? Never heard of it. But we landed there on the 1st of November in '43, and I must say that we had one more Okinawa, which was a little different landing, but Bougainville was the most, how do you put it? It was dirty, it was filthy, it was mud, muck. John was familiar with the situation. And it was so, there were pictures where you're in the water up to your knees practically, and scorpions almost as big as your hand. And the Japs were buried in great shape there, and it was just a matter of going in and digging them out. And it just that's where I ran into of all people was, and some of you all here know him, Rudy Daly from Newport. He was with the Americal, I believe, or he was a provost marshal out there. And it was just one of those, it was so thick in the midst, and they had dug in caves here, there, everywhere. And they were building the Torquay airstrip there, which was going to be the Pappy Boyington, the famous flyers there, to be able to fly protection for the bombers who were bombing Rabaul, which was going to be one of our next moves, and they always called that the Pearl Harbor of the Japanese. And they finally got it done. I saw a while ago that when we left, it was just about done, but it was just a massive jungle like this. And I must say, that's where I came acquainted with malaria. And I mean, I became acquainted with it in good shape. And we stayed there till about the 14th of February. Then we moved out. And that's where my neighbor Don Bushman was up north of where we were with the Americal Division. And so we have quite a few little stories to tell each other. And then we left there, went back to the canal. And why, I don't know, but we took a run, if you can imagine, aboard ship and went into Guam. We went into Guam for 2 days. Nothing ever happened when we came back to the canal, and that's when they formed the 6th Marine Division. And the 6th Marine Division was formed from all other units, like the 1st and the 2nd Provisional Raiders and 22nd Marines, 4th Marines, but they were all seasoned veterans, just about 98%. And that's when we prepared for, which we didn't know, but we prepared for Okinawa. And Okinawa was a strange thing. One of the worst things aboard ship, we were given a briefing that where we were going was a lot of snakes. And I said, gee, snakes. If I could see them, I was all right. If I couldn't see them, I was unhappy. But anyway, to make it short, I never did see a snake the whole time we were there. So, but when we landed on the north end, and nothing was happening. And by nothing happening, it scares the devil out of you because you want to know when the big blast is coming. Well, the big blast didn't come. And we kept moving, and we kept moving. And that's where there's a picture in here to show where this Japanese pilot with this fighter plane, we were going through by Yontan airstrip, and my group, we were right just probably from here outside or back, and he was circling that field. And the whole time we wondered what this is all about, and he landed just like it was nothing to it. He got out and he looked, and when he see who we were, he started to reach for his fire sidearm, and when he did, that was the end. But it was always a mystery of why somewhere the communications were lacking. So then we went from there, and we kept moving, and we'd run into a few Japanese here, there, and it was just so scary because it just was so, we couldn't believe it, that close to the homeland. Well, then one day we billeted, and the skipper had gone all day. And we said, well, something's up. And sure enough, when he came back late in the afternoon, he says, we're saddling up in the morning, we're heading down south. And that's when we headed down to Mashinado airstrip. And we went from there and worked our way up through with Narha, up through Shuri and Sugarloaf Hill. And needless to say, people have read and it's been through, it was all hell. It was all hell with all the caves and the undergrounds, and it was just hell from there in.
Now, I think you were telling me, was Sugarloaf, was that the mountain that was so honeycombed with caves that you would get up it and then realize that they had popped up in back of you?
That's right.
And
at first, before they could get to the lower part secured, once you started up over the mountains, come down, they would come back after you the bottom half of the caves, because we couldn't go in the caves. There was no going into caves at all, because it was murder if you did. And then finally, when we got established on the base where we could stop them from coming out, that's when we were able to start taking over the hill. But in the meantime, you had a hill here, excuse my pointing, a hill here, and Sugarloaf in the middle. Well, when you're coming into this thing, and John's familiar with crossfire, it just nailed you. I mean, it was a tough situation. And then we went on from there to take up in the Naha airstrip, Shuri Castle, but everything was all built in, caves, and you name it. So.
Wait, you know, most people know you as
and mud, excuse me.
Most people know you as a very good man, and I suspect you were all your life. But how did that killer instinct come into you, though? Is it kill or be killed, or did you truly hate the people, or?
Oh no! You were trained, and that's when you went through boot camp, and when you went from there on, and you were trained to. It was going to be, if you want to be real blunt about it, was either that man or it was me.
Right.
And that was it. And you were out there to defeat the other person, the enemy, and secure the property. And that's what it was. You didn't think of that. You didn't have time to think of that.
Now, over the years, you and I have become good friends. You might be old enough to be my grandfather, but I consider you one of my best friends. And Anya, and so I know that killing did not come easy to you. And take out your flag and show the viewers that flag and talk a little bit.
Well, I always wanted a flag, and you'll notice that it's pretty dirty, because it's just the way I took it off of the Japanese soldier. And I think with the tabs that are on here, that this might have been one of his buddies' flags that probably got hit, and he took it, to see how dirty and bloody it was. It's just the way I took it off the man the day I got it. And the way I was able to get that, I was telling a warrant officer before we went on the mission, I said, you know, I always wanted to have a flag. And he said, well, the best place to look for them is in their helmet. But be very careful when you do, because they may have a little ting-tong attached to them that'll take you with it, you know. And of course I did, and he was clear. I couldn't see anything, and I just lifted his helmet easy, and there it was, tucked up and back. And that was mine, and the other guy there got the rifle. So.
And I know in later years, I helped you actually get that transcribed, and I know that was really an emotional thing for you, because you actually have the name.
Oh no.
Yeah, Inabar.
Inabar, that was it.
And there's on that write-in, within that Japanese write-in, is our family members wishing him well and fighting for the motherland, and then he had, I think, classmates writing things to him. So it was basically saying, you know, we really, you know, we want to see you again. And somewhere along the way, your guys' paths crossed, and it was going to be one or the other. And I know that wasn't something you took lightly.
No, it was. I think at the time you're in that mode, and you're not worrying about feeling bad or feeling this, you're there. But just after it's over with, and after you this many years, you know, you still say, well, now when I look back at it, and I think, looking at him, he was same age as I was at that time, and he was there for his country, I was there for my country, and it was just a matter of survival to who went home. That's about it.
Okay, Ed, as we record this show, it is June 7th. Yesterday was June 6th. What were you doing on June 6th, 1944?
About
D-Day.
D-Day, around 6 in the morning. I think it was approximately 6 in the morning. We were in LCVPs.
Now, you crossed the English Channel that morning.
Yes.
Did you try to cross the day before? Because D-Day was actually meant to be
Yeah.
June 5th. Did you set sail?
Well, yes, we set sail, but the weather was so bad that we returned back
Yeah, but
for the first day.
I think it was you as a sailor. The waves weren't that bad, but it was for the soldiers and everybody. I think that made them a little seasick.
I never got seasick, thankful for me, but for many.
When you set sail on June 5th, and did you know just how big this operation was going to be? An operation that did not actually end up occurring until June 6th.
Before, we didn't know where we were headed for, but we did know after we were underway.
Right.
Eisenhower let us all know.
Right.
He had everybody, all of us heard that through the PA system. Everybody, you probably did too.
Yeah.
Where we knew why we were there, but nobody else knew that except us.
Now, when it became daylight,
Yes.
what did you, if you were standing there looking around, what were you seeing at daylight? Boats everywhere, ships, and
Everywhere.
I think
Hundreds.
you and Lindy were joking beforehand that you had a lot of connection to his B-17 airplanes, because you said they kept going overhead.
There is and many, especially B-17s, overhead constantly. C-47s, all kinds of them. You know, name it.
Yeah.
They were there sooner or later.
Yeah, they were soft. You were softening the cliffs up too, where the Germans were. Isn't that part of it? And then you had the paratroopers going in.
They were underway for that. They were earlier than what we have left.
Okay.
During the night, a lot of
Right.
parachutes were probably 10, 12 miles ahead of us. But anyway, on the ships, I know more about is like behind us was the battleship Texas.
Right.
The other, it's going over our head.
Yeah, you said it was like you said it was like a freight train going right over you.
Yes, and I'll name it. You could. They were all there. My speech is not good,
Right.
as you know, but I'll do the best. And anyway, I stayed there about the second or third, I can't remember, back aboard ship afterward.
So you were on LST. Which number?
LSD 337.
So show what your daughter gave
Yeah,
you. Turn it around.
I didn't do this. This happened to be in the front page of one Sunday morning Burlington Free Press. My daughter did that done.
Ed has become quite a spokesman for the D-Day survivors. He's been the subject of numerous articles, and this is just one of them. It was on the front page of.
Yes, they called for me, and I said no, I'd rather not. And this young lady, she's the nicest lady I've ever met, and she's still with. I think she's still with Burlington. I think, she's an older person, and she says I would like to come and talk with you, and I said no, I'd rather not. I really.
And I probably convinced you to do it.
She finally says, I will be there, you be there. That's what she said. And she did, and that's what happened here. We have a amphibious Navy, are the only ones that have patches.
Right.
The only ones in the Navy on our left. And Army had the same patch. The only difference, ours is red, theirs is blue. It's the same identical patch, which is there.
So you got from your, I do know there are parts of it you can't talk about because you just don't feel comfortable, but when you actually landed the troops in,
Yes.
what were the smaller crafts called?
LCVPs, the type that was on that, LCMs or LCVPs.
Right. And how many troops did it carry?
The LCVPs that I was on, I was a bellhook at the time. I was a young squirt. And we carried about approximately 28 Army or whatever. And had...
And so your 3 days was spent going back and forth to the...
I kind of forget a little bit. It might have been the second, but I think it was the third day I eventually get back aboard ship. And at that time, aboard that ship, I was not a part of, at that time, was not what they call a part of the crew
Right.
of that ship. I was there for other reasons,
Now,
as you well know.
and to me, sitting here listening to you, I would have thought those would have been 2 or 3 days of terror, but you said at 17 years old, even though you saw things blowing up around you.
I was barely 17, but
Right.
anyway.
But you said at that time, when you were doing it, it was a funny thing. You said you weren't that scared because the adrenaline and the youthfulness.
I was so busy, you didn't have time. Number one. Number two, more people were more scared than I was. And I don't know why, but it didn't bother me till later.
Right.
And there's a lot of other things that we did afterward that I won't get into.
Yeah, I know that's it. Now tell me, have you watched Saving Private Ryan, which is based on the landing?
On the
At
landing
Omaha
is
Beach.
basically like that, yes.
So was it that? So it was that horrific as was shown in Saving Private Ryan. I think you even said it was worse in many ways.
It's basically the same, but it doesn't look the same, you know, than when I was there, of course. But it's basically that's the same.
And you said they couldn't for that movie. You said they couldn't possibly have used the number of ships and planes that you saw that day.
Yeah, the ships are probably usually they're 2 or 3 miles behind us.
Right.
I forget some of the things I don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
But anyway, about a few days after that, yes, it got to me really bad afterward because you remember what you see.
Right.
And what I see and what I saw, as I don't talk that part about. I was very fortunate.
Right.
Some LCVP stayed there,
Right.
and you stayed with it. If you lose your boat, your ship, you don't go that way. You continue to go.
And you said you knew how to pick up. You knew which ship to go to pick up troops by a series of lights.
Well, yeah, you're always use the greens or the flags or whatever. When you're coming back, they circle you in another area, and until you pick up whatever ship that you go to,
Right.
and other LCV2s as well. And then you circle around afterward after you're filled, and then they tell you to go.
Right.
You go in a line, and then a V, and then hit in
Right.
to the
Right.
I'm sorry, my
Okay, no.
speech.
So, we have the Air Force, well, the Army Air Corps, we have the Marines and the Navy, and I know the three of you love to kid each other about the different services, but some people would say, well, Lindy, you only had to fly X number of flights and then you went home, but then, or like for example, I know Joe, you're always humorously telling Ed that every time the action began, he'd drop off the troops and run. And so you guys all joke about it. But Lindy, you had a view of the war from the sky. Can you even conceptualize what, say, Joe's life was like actually being down in the jungle? Even though you were different theaters, but can you really conceptualize it?
I think I probably can now, because there's been enough publicity and movies and so on where you see it. And when you were talking about D-Day, for example, I believe that they used some actual footage in filming Saving Private Ryan. I'm pretty sure there was newsreel footage used in that movie, and I did see that. But their situation, you know, was very different than mine. They were slogging it out day by day, and we were sweating it out, wondering when is our next mission and where is it going to be, and how rough is it going to be. And of course we took a lot of static from the ground troops, because we came back every night, slept in streets in a barracks. It wasn't like being in a foxhole out in the mud, but it was a different kind of tension. Theirs was day in, day out, prolonged, and I can understand that. And ours was more, well, we're okay today, but tomorrow we got to go again. And we never knew for sure where we were going. Some missions were relatively easy, some were bad. And if anyone thinks that it was a picnic being in the Army Air Force, the 8th Air Force had the highest casualty rate of any unit of any branch of service.
Right. If you guys had to fight the war all over again, would you join the same branches?
I would.
Yes.
And I gotta add to Lindy's statement that I just want you to know that I was a hell of a lot happier, even though it was not good, on terra firma than I was up there with a motor gone here and a motor gone there, and didn't know where the hell you were going to end up. For that reason, it wasn't good, no. It wasn't good on the ground, but to me, it was a lot better than up there. So I could go, you guys float, but just like with Eddie, if they got nailed, they went zoom, and that was it. But I would go right back and do the same thing. Yeah.
What about you, Ed?
I might stay a little longer.
I just happened to be thinking about the LST. Every time when we're back aboard ship, we're back and forth between France and England constantly, moving all the time. First, most of the people we were picking up was wounded, loaded with a lot of wounded people. Other trips going back, well, we're always full going over, of course. But coming back, we're always full too. We had several times we had S troops, Germans, in the well deck. They went back to England. They put them to work there. But that's what happened to us many times. Before the D-Day happened, even that ship had already had railways tracked into the well deck, and we carried around 28 railroad cars. And after Cherbourg was where we could go into Cherbourg, that's where we carried. That's what we did. That was way ahead.
Right.
Happened way ahead before D-Day. This is all planned very well, and it worked.
Scott, I got to tell you, there's one thing with the Navy. They made awful good coffee.
Well, I know. We trained most all the Marines, and that's why they were so good. They were all Navy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. We like these guys too because they dropped those things down ahead of us. So it was.
So Lindy and Ed, they were in the European theater for the first part. I know Ed ended up over in your territory, but
Yeah.
following the D-Day and following the fall of Germany, the world's focus was now on Japan, and both of you were preparing for the invasion of the
Well,
Japanese homeland, correct?
I will have to say this: we carried a lot of prisoners too, Japanese prisoners, during still World War II
Right.
in the Asiatic Pacific. And that ship I was aboard there, the Washburn, we carried basically the same we used to with the LSCs, except we were much bigger. It was a big ship.
Right,
For
the
its
Washburn
day,
was-
it was a big ship. For its day. Today, it's a peanut.
The Washburn was an attack ship.
Yes. Yes, we had 28 or 29 landing craft.
So
And we were all amphibious. And we did make, I was in the Philippines. We were just coming in for the first bomb. From Manila Bay. And then the second one. And just a short time after that, we made occupational landings. And the place at a place called Wakayama is where we made occupational landings.
well, let's talk about the bombs, because
Yes, okay.
there are some people today who basically say we should not have dropped those bombs. That was cruel. What do you make of that, Lindy? Was that the right thing to do at that time?
I've always agreed with it.
What about you, Joe?
Oh,
You
yes.
fought the Japanese, and they were you'll agree, I
Well,
believe, they were very good fighters, but they didn't give up either.
No. I think the way that you can answer that, and from my perspective, is that if they had it, they would have done it. We had it, we did it. And I can honestly say that I know, well, Lindy was over on the other side, but
Okay.
still it could have affected. But he and I may not even be here talking to you with so many
Exactly.
people. And it meant there'd be so many lives taken by it if we didn't try to land. Because when this thing ended, we had come back from Okinawa, and we were on Guam, and we were looking at the bulletin board at the company street, and they had a map as to who was going to hit where in Japan. And that's when they started hollering it in 45, it was all over. But if you had to invade there, you would have been, so many people would have got killed there. They had it in thousands. And
Today, I would probably have to think about it. But during that period of time, I would
done.
say yes. Because you or I probably would both be dead if it weren't for the bomb. Especially, that's
Very,
why
very
we went from Europe.
Yeah.
That's why we were in the Pacific to hit Japan. That's why we were there. And if we had hit, I'm sure that they didn't like us very well during that period of time.
But the thing is from talking to actually all three of you, but particularly you two who fought in the Japanese theater, is when the tsunami happened in the last couple of years in Japan, I interviewed you for a short article about your feelings about it, because you could have been saying, well, they got what they deserved, but that isn't the way you felt. You've put those old wounds behind you. And how did you feel when you heard about the tsunami that did so much devastation on Japan?
Well, as I said, that really I had no ill feelings, because so many of those people there had no bearing whatsoever as to what we went through, probably. So it's over, it was done, we're back. If it had been some different situations, you may have some bitterness, and you always have a little bit of bitterness, but you can't it's just like with our country. You can't expect them to have innocence against our people any more than you can them. The fella that had this, he was there because his country was there. I was there because my country was there. And what he would have done prior to that, or what I done afterwards, I just couldn't. No, I couldn't.
We've had also some. I've also interviewed some war brides who came back with the servicemen, or just people who grew up in these countries, and they have a harder time putting the war behind them because, while the servicemen they were doing battle, it was their countries that was being bombed. In this case, the ones I've interviewed were the ones who grew up in the European theater, and they're still very bitter on what they went through with the Nazis. It's like, as I think all of you have been in the same room and chatted with Hubert Dabra from Montgomery, and you guys are very good with him. Hubert was in the German Special Forces, and he's very eloquent in his speaking, and you guys accept him for who he is, and you guys don't hold it against him. I'm not quite so sure I would team him up with some of the war brides I know, even though they're in their 80s and 90s. I'm seriously wondering whether Hubert would come out of there without a few scratches and maybe both his eyeballs missing, because that's just the dynamics that I have found.
Okay, now let me ask you, why do you feel that way? So that we'll get more. I mean, they were there, and Hubert had part of the deal of the European situation.
Right.
So that's probably where, as they grew up, they were bitter because it happened.
It was their
Right.
country.
Right.
It was Pearl Harbor, but many times over.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and so they take the war really, really personal, and what happened with their country.
It was, yeah.
I think I know. It took me a few years to get over having a lot of ill feelings towards Japan and Germany. Even though I was on the European side, I lost my very closest high school buddy in one of the operations similar to Joe. Dick Ladd was killed on Tinian. Dick Ladd
Yes.
was killed on Tinian. He was a Marine.
Yeah.
Combination of Pearl Harbor, losing a very close friend. It took me quite a long time to get over feeling resentment towards those people. But it's a long time ago now, and actually probably strangely, well, maybe not strangely enough, maybe because we did the right thing after the war, probably Germany and Japan are two of our best friends.
Well, that's the way I'm trying to, what Lindy's saying is that how many years afterwards that you still had that resentment of the fact that it happened. And as time grew, then you kind of weaned a little bit, so that when you look at some of those people in that tsunami and all that, they were little ones and this, they were innocent people, they were new. So
I can tell you that I personally took a long time that I like Japanese people for a long time. We used to pick up many Japanese, bringing them back home shortly after the war. Or like New Guinea, for example, we picked up a bunch and bring them back home. And they were mean aboard that ship. I'm not kidding. They still disliked us.
Now,
So it took a long time for me to forget that. Today it doesn't bother me anymore.
I've interviewed several German soldiers, other than Hubert, who lived in this greater region, and the one thing they always talk about, for the most part, I guess I should say, is the great treatment they received after becoming POWs. And a lot of them became POWs at the end of the war, and there was a mad dash to the English sector and the American sector, because nobody
Right.
wanted to be in the Russian sector.
Right.
And because for the most part, the United States treated their POWs quite humanely. And I know you weren't ever a POW, Lindy, but Francis, our POW friend, was saying that there was even goodwill within some German POW camps. Like he was saying how when Hitler gave the order near the end of the war to exterminate the POWs, their lives were actually saved by the Luftwaffe, the German equivalent to the American Air Force. And although they were on opposing sides, they were brothers in a way, because they were airmen. And
Yeah.
he said if it wasn't for the Luftwaffe, the Wehrmacht was going to kill them all. And he said there was a violent overthrow of the camp, which saved their lives. So, so the war is over. The war is over. Lindy, what did you do with your life?
When I got back, first thing I did, of course, was get married. And then, on the basis of my experience going through cadet training, I decided that I had better go to college. I was in a mix of cadets who, some had, like me, had no college. Some had some college, some had college degrees, and the flying part was one thing, but the ground school was something else. And I could see that those guys breezed through ground school a lot more easily than I did, because of their additional education. So I went to the University of Vermont, got my degree there, and thought that I wanted to be a teacher, and I taught school 1 year in Morrisville and decided that that was not the right career choice. So there was an opportunity to go into a management training situation at the old plywood mill that existed in North Troy, which was a pretty big operation in those years.
The Blair veneer mill?
The old, well, it was, by the time I was there, it was called Owens Illinois Plywood. And so I went into a management trainee program there, eventually became the plant manager there, had a better financial opportunity in Louisville, Kentucky. Went there, was sales manager for a different plywood firm there, and eventually decided we wanted to come back to Vermont, and I worked for former Governor Snelling as sales manager of his firm for several years, and got a little bit tired of all the travel that involved, and decided to go into a different sales career. I ended up in the real estate business and sold real estate for a few years, and ended up managing a real estate firm in Burlington, and retired from that, and then returned to my roots in Derby.
Okay, Joe, what did you do? Because you were in a kind of a unique situation when you returned home. Well, you'd already been orphaned before you even went to war, so you didn't have a lot to return to. So,
Well, when I came back, I was very fortunate that the lady that I married allowed me, and her mother allowed me to come in and live with them, because really I had no place. I was living with my brother when I left here, and he was gone because he was a regular military man, and he had gone back. He was with the Border Patrol. He went back in the Army, and he had moved on. His wife had gone back to Massachusetts. So I had to find a place to live, and Bev and her mother let me have, they had 3 bedrooms, so I had one of them. And I said, well, I got to pay my way, so I was up to Brown's Drugstore one day shortly after that, and Jim Palin, who you know well, was in there talking with Roland, and he was complaining he needed help. And I said, well, if you need help on the farm, I can tell you this much. I got to go to work. I got to make a living. This was about 10 days after I got out. And I said, Jim, I do know how to use a shovel. And anybody familiar with the farm knows what I meant about using a shovel. He said, you're kidding? I said, no, I got to have some work. So I went to work up at the Palin's farm, and I peddled milk with Dean all that winter. So anyway, when I went to work peddling milk, I got through there, and I went to work for P.W. Lawson for about 4 years in the parts department. And then Mr. Sokol Auto Parts, got a hold of me, and he wanted to hire me, and I went to work for him. But in between that, I had 2 years with the A&P. And I liked the A&P, but they wanted to transfer me off somewhere, and I said, that's no go. So that's how I went to work for Mr. Sokol. And I spent, I think, about 13 years or so with him until he sold. And then I took the postal exam, and I went into post office, and I retired in there, post office in 1984.
When I introduced you, Joe, when I introduced you as the unofficial mayor of Derby Line. Now, how did you get that title? Did you have to run for it, or did you declare victory?
That was kind of like a declared victory in this way. For years, there was a fellow named Roy Patel who had a gas station up there. And Roy was always considered the mayor. Well, as we used to get together nights up street, we'd have a little fun, and we decided we'd have a few elections, and I used to run against Roy. And I never could beat him. So I always said, the day that he passes away, I am going to be the official mayor. And that happened. I assigned myself as mayor. Since then, nobody runs against me.
And what kind of power comes with that position?
Oh,
of being
it's
a
the
non-mayor?
greatest, I'm telling you. When they start complaining about their sewer rates and all that, I head for Holland. Yeah.
So
it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
So who's in the line? Who's in the line up in Derby Line to take over for you?
Well, I could let Eddie do it, but he doesn't live in Derby Line.
No,
he's out of town. We don't. We just let him.
Well, you only live a few feet from Derby Line.
Derby.
Yeah, but you only live a few feet from the Derby Line.
I didn't want to get into the village.
So one of these days, I'll put an article in the paper. I'm retiring. Who takes it over? That's it.
You know, very possibly. Maybe Buzzy Roy, if his conviction of carrying a pizza across the border doesn't.
Poor Buzzy. Poor Buzzy.
So Ed, the war is over. What did you do with your life?
Boy, was I in trouble. I never went through high school, believe it or not. And so I stayed another 3 years in the Navy. So I stayed another 2 years, and I got hurt. I busted, and they had me in Newport and 12 places. I didn't like it there anyway. Anyway, they discharged me. At that time, they didn't need anybody in those days, and any little thing I got rid of me. So I ended up, I said, well, I used my GI Bill, and guys like you trained me to fly.
Right.
That's true. And eventually I became a commercial pilot. And I flew as a commercial pilot for most of my life.
You flew.
But I had other things that I did during that same period of time.
Yeah, you made canoes too, right?
Well, first, yes. First I had the Newport Air Freight business, and I used to fly into Logan every day. And until I resold it to a friend of mine, Cecil Wright. You remember Cecil?
Remember Cecil? Yeah.
I sold that to him after I'd had it for about 12 years, I guess. And anyway, then I ended up into canoe business.
You know, it's funny because I've interviewed you guys so much over the years. I know the little stories even. Like, I can still picture you, even though you never did find a picture. When you were a little kid, you were a bellhop at the Newport Hotel. And you said you had a little blue...
You're right. I was probably 13, 14 years old. Every summer, my parents would bring me to the Newport Hotel, and that was a ritzy place in its day. And I was a bellhop. The little round thing and all the... Oh, yes. Yeah.
And after the war, you were a bouncer there.
That was years after.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They used to call him the Philip Morris man.
Oh, God. I don't want to talk about that.
those are different days in Newport, huh?
Yeah, well, that was a lot of fun, too. It really was.
So, you know, the one thing is, I've got to know all three of you guys, and all three of you are stand-up guys. But Joe, you recently made the news for what you did, and I just want to know, to tell the listeners why you gave your own Marine Corps flag to the young Sykes boy. Well, I shouldn't say boy, he was a Marine serving, I believe it was in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Just to the listeners, the viewers, this young Marine was serving in the combat zone, and somebody had the audacity to take the American flag and his Marine Corps flag off his parents' flagpole, and Joe came to the rescue.
Well, how it happened was Scott, I think, was the first one told me about it. And I had a regular flagpole size flag, but I had also another smaller one. So I thought, well, this kid's over in Afghanistan fighting for us, and there's no reason that I couldn't take that flag off that flagpole and present it to them and let them put it on their flagpole. And I did. They accepted it, and they were pleased. And as a matter of fact, the day that I took it up to them, they said, somebody on the phone wants to talk with you, and it was their son.
And what was his, first name again?
What's that?
What was his name?
Kevin.
Colin?
Colin,
Right.
yeah. And so Colin and his wife, they were pleased with the flag, and they said, "It's yours. You keep it. I've got a little one I can use." And I said, "There should be a flag on that pole. Whether you ever get your other one back or not, you're going to have a Marine Corps flag," and they still have it.
Right. And
they still have it.
Just, you know, I know you weren't looking for attention, but
no,
this old Marine giving a flag to this family of a young Marine, you know, brought. I think that story was told all over the eastern seaboard in all the newspapers.
Yeah, there was a lot on it, but my feeling is that, you know what they say, just like in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, once a Marine, you're always a Marine. And you say simplify, which is always faithful, and you are faithful to your comrade. So,
right.
And that was my feeling. That those people were devastated when that happened,
right.
And I know them well, and I knew that kid been over there a long time, and they just were down. And when they brought that flag up, you can see what it did to them, and it meant that their son was with them again. So
what I always found interesting though is somehow their American flag suddenly ended up back at their place. The Marine flag never reappeared, but somebody had a little guilty conscience, and they brought the American flag back when nobody was around.
That's right. The American flag came back. All of a sudden, there it was by the mailbox. They'd been out, but the Corps flag never came back.
So, Linda, do you think you're a better person because of your service to your country during the World War II?
Probably, yes. You learn a lot of good things in the service. You really do.
What about you, Joe? Are you a better person?
Yeah, I think you live with a more responsible part to life. You do more things on a constructive basis. Whereas when I went in, I was just like, I told you earlier, it was a bed of roses life as far as I was. But now you concentrate, you get into the real thinking and the consideration of what's going on around you, and it does, I think no question about it, makes you a different person.
What about you, Ed?
Well,
Be honest now.
I have generations through me that are still in the service.
Right. You have a grandson who's in the
Right.
Army?
Yes, Army, Navy. I have my granddaughter is in the Air Force. Her name is Crystal. I shouldn't mention
No,
names.
no, that's fine.
Well, anyway, Crystal Laws, my daughter's daughter, and she's in the Air Force, and she's a commissioned officer, and she's a pilot.
Good for her.
And she started with me when 8, 9 years old. Was kind of rubbed off for me. And right now she's full-time, and before that she was on the C-135s, the old tankers.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's in Austin, Texas. She's flying that new F-35. She's in training right now. And not many are women.
Right, yeah. Actually, I was thinking, come to think about it, I was thinking of your nephew, Dave. David was in the Navy.
Who?
Your nephew, David.
Yes, David.
He was in the Navy, and
Yes.
his boy is in the
Yeah,
Army.
Right, and his brother, older brother, Tanner, he was in the SIP. I'm looking for a word. He was in the not Seabees, a fish.
Fish.
Seals.
Seals?
SEALs. I'm sorry. He was in the SEALs right up to the end until he got hurt.
Right.
And once
Tough outfit.
once you get hurt, you're out.
Oh, yeah.
He's still in the Navy right now. He's in the new ship, the Bush.
Right.
It's pretty new. Right now he's in Virginia. That's where the ship is. So that's where he is now. He's a second class. He's already going right upstairs.
Okay, with only a few more minutes left, because the next topic could be a whole show on its own, but in the last few years we have been at war again. Iraq and Afghanistan. How do you feel, Lindy, about our servicemen who are serving, who have served, and who are serving? You know, especially in these political times where everything seems to be politicized.
Well, I certainly admire the guys. They're doing the same thing at their generational time
Right.
as we were doing. And so I have great admiration for them. Whether we've always done the right thing as far as Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, I think will probably be debatable for another 20 years, and we aren't going to know, we three aren't going to know, whether it's been a good mission, successful mission, or not. I think the jury's out.
What about you, Joe?
Well, I go along with what Lindy says because, it's the background. I do know, like, as far as career, I remember saying to my brother, why are we in Korea? And he said, well, we have a treaty with Korea. And he says, I said, okay, what does the treaty stand? He said, the treaty reads that if the North at any time shows force against South Korea, we will come to their aid. So that's why we're there. But the rest of it, it's like Lindy says, one of those things, what's it going to end up, we don't know. And I can't rightfully say whether I just wished we didn't have to be there. It's been a lot of things happen, so. Whether it was, he says it's the right move or not, we will know down the line, so.
Yeah.
What about you, Ed?
Well, I was just thinking of the end on the air freight business. It used to be it used to be the Flying Tiger line. You know the Flying Tiger line, and it was in the line with that, with my freight, and I got a lot of freight out of Canada here, and it kept me busy. There was a good little freight, and
But do you think? How do you feel about today's servicemen and what they're doing? Servicemen and women.
oh, men and women. Well, I think they're great. If that's what they want to do, most of them, right out of high school, went right into the service. Not Crystal, she kept right on flying during her period of while she was through college, and she ended up in the Air Force. She's been there now about 10 years. And she says something to me about, she says, maybe I'll probably go. I says, I don't think so. You should go at least 20 years.
Now, Linda, you made reference that that you probably will not live to see the results of these current wars. Is well, the realities is that the three of you have been fortunate not to join the 2,000 World War II veterans a day who die. My question to you is, to three of you, because I look at you guys and I say, wow, is where is the fountain of youth? Because all three of you, you're 90 years old, Lindy, and you're, what are you, 88 or
89.
89, and Ed, you're the baby of the crew. How old are you?
Yeah. I've always been the low end. Very young. I'm still very young.
What are you, 80, 84?
I'm only 86.
So is there the fountain of youth? Do you consider yourself just lucky, or did you do something right?
Lindy, I think he'll agree. People worry about birthdays,
Right.
and they get to be like 40, 45, and oh my God, they're gonna go off. No way. Birthday comes, it goes. Like my wife, Loretta, she had her birthday. We had a cake. Mine, we had a cake. That was it. We didn't worry about anything. And when's the next one? That's it. Now, I'm lucky. And I'm probably like a lot of guys.
Yeah, but you're part cat, though.
What's that?
You're part cat, 9 lives. Because I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to believe you're gone until I see it, because I know you've pulled yourself out of some nosedives in your life.
Yeah, I have. It's just,
I think they
you gotta
went
be
a little
determined.
better.
Don't worry about your birthday. Let the next one come. You know, have another party.
What about a sense of people tell me to really grow old, you've got to have a sense of humor, because if you don't have any sense of
That's
humor,
it.
it really stinks.
That's it.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
I think that having a positive outlook on life
Right.
is definitely a contributing factor.
Right.
I think people who are down all the time,
Yeah.
takes some kind of a toll on your body. But, there's a few elements. Good luck, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have been one of those guys that a piece of flak hit and blew the plane up. I could have been me.
Right.
You don't have any control over where you are at a certain moment in time.
Right.
So luck is one. Good genes is another. And maybe a good wife is another one. I get monitored pretty well as to my eating habits.
Yeah.
What?
A good wife.
Ed, see, here I am, half your guys' age, and I can't even remember names anymore. Is Lindy, I often quote your wife quite often, and I know it's probably not her joke, but she's the one who told me it is. She said, when you get to be your age, as in yours and hers age, you're even afraid to buy green bananas because you're afraid that you won't get to live long enough to enjoy them.
Right.
Now that we're wrapping the show up, Lindy, what would you like to say to the viewers? Do you have any words of wisdom?
Wow, that's a heavy one. I guess since you've been inviting us to speak to the students,
Right.
I would just say to the young people, follow your passion.
Right. Yeah.
That's the same thing as the young people. We were talking about the service, and we were talking about being at the high school, and my message to them was, if you go to college, fine, but if you're not, try the service because you have a giant stepping stone to get into college. I did mention the ROTC. You people keep going at it because that's where my brother started, and he had a full military career. But like Lindy says, everybody's got to keep a positive attitude out there. Just kind of keep things up on an up level instead of a down level.
That's a good comment. Do you think there's too much negativism in the world? Do you think we have become just too negative towards everything?
Well, there's a lot. I won't know if there's too much, but there is an awful lot. And I think the more you can cut that down, the better off we'll all be.
Okay, Ed, the baby of the crew.
Yeah.
What are your words of wisdom?
Boy, that's a question. Good question. Well, knowing a good friend of mine, I was very fortunate. Yeah, and another gentleman who are still hanging around. Unusually, all three of us are still here, but we had two of our friends that had breakfast.
Oh yeah. Oh, Bill McCarthy and Albert Gagne.
God, yeah.
But he, and we still have our coffee.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Okay, I want to thank you again for coming on the show because I think when the phrase was coined, America's greatest generation, I think it's so true. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in today. Thank you.